Good afternoon again to our friends from the media. Thank you for being here to our last press conference at the sidelines of the APEC events here in Bagac, Bataan. With us today, our Finance Undersecretary Gil Beltran. He will give us some highlights of the overall discussions for the Senior Finance Officials meeting, as he served as a chair of that meeting. And we also have PPP Center's Mr. Ricote. He will talk about the highlights of the discussions earlier today on infrastructure development agenda for the APEC region. So we are going to ask the two gentlemen to give a brief statement, and then we can open the floor for Q&A. Perhaps I can ask Mr. Ricote, Mr. Hilberton.
In this meeting, two major activities were made. One is the seminar or workshop on fiscal management through transparency and reforms, wherein the experts and representatives from governments of the 20 economies recommended some measures to be adopted by countries to further the achievement of the objectives of the CAP, the Cebu Action Plan. In the senior officials meetings that followed, there were discussions on the four pillars of the Cebu Action Plan, and there were activities that were agreed on that will be done before they report to the finance ministers meeting in September. So there were many activities agreed on, and first on the first pillar, that's the that's financial integration. There was agreement to pursue further activities to set up movable collateral registry and credit information bureaus. Some countries are not yet ready because they need laws to create these two institutions, but in our case, in the case of the Philippines, we are ready because we have already laws creating both institutions. And the long-term objective is to link these two, although some may not yet be ready to join the linking. That's our long-run objective. The second part of financial integration is not yet. The financial sector liberalization capital account liberalization. These two are long-term objectives. They can only be done after we have fixed the domestic systems like financial regulation and the two institutions that need to be set up. Only then can we pursue the second stage, which is the more difficult one, financial sector liberalization. That can be done by other hosts in the future, not the Philippines. The second pillar is fiscal transparency. There are already certain initiatives ongoing in the international community on certain opening up initiatives. Like for instance, the OJP, that's the open government partnership. We are one of the founders of OGP, and we enjoin. Actually, they don't want to use the word enjoin. Encourage member countries to also participate. This activity entails the opening up of data to the public on revenues and expenditures. And there are other subsectors that can be opened up, like in the case of the Philippines, we have EITI, Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. There are also other sectors that need to be opened up, like Open Budget Initiative, for instance. And in all of these initiatives, countries, member economies, are encouraged to join. In our case, we have joined almost all of these. There are just a few which we haven't joined. The third pillar is financial resiliency. which we have of all we the most advanced here is Japan, which is of course hit by many disasters. But the economies agreed that there should be action done on this because the APEC economies are one of the most vulnerable to disasters. So we lose about $165 billion annually to disasters. In the case of the Philippines, it's $1.7 billion lost during the last 10 years, average annually. We lose that amount. So what we need is to reduce the risks of such losses. And one of the things that we are looking at is sovereign disaster risk finance, which would involve sovereigns, which means setting up some funds to reduce disaster risks. In the case of the Philippines, we are trying to set up a People's Support Fund. There's already a law on it, and we are just going to get some budget for it. In the case of local governments, there is a plan to set up an insurance scheme for infrastructures for local governments, because whenever a disaster comes, they might lose many of these infrastructures, and they need to rebuild them very quickly, which is why there's a need for insurance. On the household side, the private sector has been very aggressive in formulating products, in trying to market products that are needed by households and small and micro, small, and medium enterprises to insure their assets, houses, for instance, and equipment, so that when a disaster strikes, they can be able to get premiums that will allow them to rebuild and restart their businesses and their lives. While microinsurance cannot stop disasters, it will allow the households and enterprises to stand and resume their businesses and their daily lives. The fourth one is infrastructure development, and I think Mr. Ricote can talk more about it than I do. He's the expert on it.
The involvement of the PPP program here, PPP Center particularly, is under that pillar on enhancing financial resiliency, particularly infrastructure and development projects. There was a session called Accelerating Infrastructure Development and Financing, where we talked about PPP as a major financing option. Of course, they had the Philippines talk about our experience. This involvement of the Philippines also goes back to the last meeting we had in March, where the Philippines was enjoined to be co-chair of the APEC PPP Experts Advisory Panel. Ms. Cosette Canilao, our executive director, is co-chair of that, along with Canada. We also hosted last March 4 in Tagaytay the Asia Pacific Infrastructure Partnership APIP dialogue, and that's where we talk about infrastructure financing. Of course, the main discussion revolve around PPPs, financing, guarantee program, pipeline development, and how experience in the region can be shared among APEC member countries. And I think that's where we also came in with our proposal for, number one, a knowledge management portal on PPP programs and projects in the region, where we can have an online sharing of cases, innovations, pipelines of projects. And then the other one is a proposal from the Philippines, again, of course, with Department of Finance here, standardization of PPP contracts, putting into practice or some templates that we can probably share with the rest of the region on those areas of PPP contracting that we have already established to be working, particularly on specific contractual provisions of risk sharing, financing mix, those kinds of templating of PPP contracting based on our experience so far.
Okay, we are now opening the floor to questions. Who wants to ask the first question?
If I may add, all of this formalization of proposals and planning for infrastructure development under the APEC will be discussed in the July 23-24 workshop on infrastructure development and financing in Iloilo. I think this was announced a while ago. This will be the next activity.
Okay, we are now opening the floor to questions. Who wants to ask the first question? Okay, Ben.
Hi sir, good afternoon. I'm Ben De Vera from Philippine Daily Inquirer. For Usec Beltran, since you mentioned that in the case of some countries, they cannot really implement some of the projects we're eyeing under the 4 pillars because of their laws, but how can, have they already committed to at least pursue, probably to put in place, to maybe change their laws or put in place other legislation that would allow them to also implement the various actions that under the Cebu Action Plan?
Oh, there are just a few of these, and our development partners are now going around the region trying to convince many of these member economies to do some reforms, because these are necessary to enable their micro, small, and medium industries to grow. There's no way that these industries can grow without a credit information bureau, because nobody will know that these MSMEs are performing well, and nobody will lend to them without information. Credit information is very important. You cannot finance all your activities through equity alone, and you have to borrow from the market. And the market likes that they're given accurate information, and this is what a credit information bureau will provide. So eventually, all of this will be set up. It will just take time because they will have to convince their legislators to adopt laws, new laws.
And sir, with regards to timetable, is there any specific timetable with regards to the full implementation of all the actions under the Cebu Action Plan? Will this be short-term, medium-term, or long-term? And
There are short-term, medium-term, and long-term activities. We can only implement some under our chairmanship.
which are these? Which could be implemented for the short term?
We will report that in September,
Okay.
because some activities have been started, and it will take some time before we will see the results. And we will report that in September.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Okay, who wants to ask the next question? Mika.
Good afternoon, Mika Flores of Business World. Usec Gil, what was the general response of the member economists with respect to the 4 pillars under the Cebu Action Plan?
Very
In terms-
supportive.
Okay.
Actually, many of them welcome all those initiatives and the activities under them. There was significant support for all of the pillars. Even those countries which cannot yet participate, they say, it's all right, we will join later when we are ready. Because it takes some internal activities to be done before you can join. Like, for instance, improving your own regulations, setting up the institutions necessary to deliver some of the requirements before you can join. Like in the case of Open Data Initiative, you must be able to set up a computer system that will be the basis for rolling out, unfolding the reports, economic reports that will be opened to the public.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, Chino.
Hi, good afternoon. Chino Leico, Manila Bulletin. My question is related to infrastructure financing. Sir, may I know if there was any discussion about the Beijing-led AIIB during these meetings?
Yes, there was support for the AIIB and the AIF, ASEAN Infrastructure Fund. And there was also a new facility provided by Japan, 110 billion US dollars for high quality infrastructure projects.
What about the position ng Philippines on this AIB?
Country positions are not discussed in a forum like this. It's the international setting that's discussed.
On the part of the Chinese, may mga ano ba sila?
Wala.
Push or anything? None.
None.
Thank you, sir.
If I may, the other, I think, major item discussed relative to financing of infrastructure was bringing in institutional investors, pension funds, as contributors to this, increasing infrastructure financing requirement.
Yeah, in the case of ABAC, the private sector arm of APEC, they have been trying to organize the investors so that, especially the pension funds, so that they can participate more actively in infrastructure financing. Because they have a lot of funds, interest rates are low, but they have ready funds for infrastructure investment.
Any more questions? Okay, Mika.
Good afternoon again. To Attorney Ricote. Sir, I understand next month we'll be holding the workshop on infrastructure financing. Sir, can you just give us a broad overview of what are the topics and issues that will be that you plan or that the Philippine government plans to tackle with member economies, and what are the expected results or consensus building exercises that you're trying to work on for next month's workshop? Thank you.
First, I'm not a lawyer. Sorry. Yeah, actually, it's a next step to this whole dialogue on infrastructure development and financing. It's a workshop on a specific project development and financing. A major component of that would be PPP, and I think the role of the PPP advisory panel, co-chaired by the Philippines, will be very important here. It's initiated initially or particularly by the ABAC, and this dialogue with participants from the region, development partners as well, on how we can map out, we talked about this a while ago, long and short-term pipelines of project and some financing options that will be mapped out for this whole agenda. No specifics yet on what specific topics, what sessions, sir? Not yet.
Oh, I think there are already, except that I don't have a copy
Correct.
with me. I will just ask the staff to provide the press later when we
Right.
go back to Manila.
Hi, sir. I'm again Ben of the Inquirer. Sir, since we ultimately aim financial resiliency through infrastructure among the through the 4 pillars of the Cebu Action Plan, but is there any ultimate goal in terms how this would translate into economic growth, like how many percentage points can be added, or because as you mentioned, we also lose a lot of money from disasters. So if we're more resilient, financially stable, how much more would this contribute to the APEC economies in the short, medium, or long term? Have you measured that? Is there any ultimate goal like that?
Nobody has ever made a study on how much GDP will rise if they recover very quickly. But what we know is that when you reduce risks through financial instruments, you encourage confidence in investments. That is the most important thing that the risk reduction measures can do. It will encourage confidence, which will boost investment.
And have you measured how much more investments could?
Nobody has done a study, but we'll try to get someone to do that. Perhaps the APEC study unit can do that. We will try and get them to do some pencil pushing to get a scholarly study made.
All right, thank you, sir.
Any more questions? Okay, wala na talaga, guys. The 3 guys. Okay, so for your closing statements, gentlemen, Mr. Ricote, perhaps you can state where do you think, or where do we want APEC to go from here, especially in terms of PPP? Are we over the medium term? Are we seeing some cross-border PPP investments?
Of course, the long-term agenda is that the region will be looked at as one PPP market, not just the Philippines. But this is actually what we're looking at when we proposed a knowledge portal that will share experiences and innovations in the way we did PPPs here and our neighbors. But as you pointed out a while ago, there's a lot of pre-work before we reach that, some policy and process setting up, building of capacities in these specific countries. As you know, the readiness and the agenda for PPPs in this prospective countries are in different stages. But yes, this venue, this platform for sharing and dialogue on how we did it, innovations, learn from each other, the role of development partners. I think that's also what the development partners, ADB, World Bank, are looking at, how this whole region can be marketed as a PPP destination. The Philippines, of course, has been asked to take the lead there, and we have been very open to that, particularly through the PPP Experts Advisory Panel. A lot of the next work on that would be covered by, I said, that infrastructure development financing workshop in July and the subsequent meetings of that experts panel on PPP for APEC.
Okay, similarly, Usec, how confident are we that the cap will be approved by the finance ministers in September, and that the other countries who will be hosting in the succeeding years will also adopt the cap?
Given the strong support expressed by the member economies to the measures that have been proposed under the cap, we are sure that many of these will be pursued to their successful end, which means we will, in the end, look at an APEC with the growth that is very inclusive, resilient, and sustainable. We think that with this, we can continue to map out other cooperative schemes that will further enhance the growth in the region. As the member economies have realized during the meeting, because of the data provided by the IMF and ADB, Asia Pacific is the growth driver of the world economy. It's the fastest growing region in the world, and we will remain as that. Also, we would like to thank, of course, to make our event successful, our partners at the local level, the local government units, especially the province of Bataan, has been very helpful in making our meeting successful. They provided us glimpses of our culture and our history, and they also appreciated the very festive cultural night, and they said that many of them will come back again to visit the area, Bagac, in the future with their families, of course. And we welcome that very much. Actually, in the outside world, we have not, many of our beautiful places are not well known outside the world. But with this meeting, we have shown the beauty of the Philippines to a small portion of a potential big market, which is the whole world. We hope that the word on the beauty of the Philippines will be expressed more fully throughout the whole world, so that we will be a big tourism destination in the future. Not just a tourism destination, but a business hub in the region.
Okay, thank you, sir. Special thanks also goes to Las Casas Filipinas de Acozar for providing a good venue for the delegates. So thank you very much to our friends from the media. This ends our entire sessions of press conferences for these two APEC events. So we hope that you had a lot of information for your news writing activities, and see some of you in Iloilo. Thank you.
Yes, actually, they were very impressed with what they saw in Las Casas Filipinas de Acusar. They were so impressed with how we were able to preserve the old architecture, the Spanish period architecture, and they hope that they can also do that in their own countries.
Thank you.
Thank you.